Hello, everyone, and welcome for another exciting week of creating appealing characters. This is week 7. So, yeah, this week we're really going to focus on finishing up everything that we can before we get into the final posing for our character. So, obviously, posing will influence a lot of things like cloth wrinkling and, some body proportions and stuff like that. It's not going to be a straight one for one from our neutral model into the pose as far as bending limbs into place and doing stuff like that. So there's going to be some resculpting that'll have to happen just to make it feel a little bit more like the concept. And in the process of posing, you'll usually find that there's always some design tweaks that need to be made, some proportional things. A lot of stuff will become apparent as we start to move stuff around. So we will get into that in the following lecture. Let's go ahead and get started. So last time we took our character out of the boring gray stage and into, starting to put some accessories and things on there. So you should be somewhere around this stage when we start this week. So all of our clothing is represented. All of our clothing and accessories are blocked in and ready for finalization. We worked on our hair. And so now we're ready to just kind of, any proportions that you see need to change based on the new additions. Now would be a good time to do that. But we're going to be working on that also as we start to post stuff. We're going to start off with clothing with the more final clothing. So this is going to be where we're going to start tightening up our clothing and our costuming to get the clothes most of the way there. And then we can finish it once they are in pose. So, what makes our clothing feel believable and finished? To me, I think that going in and adding these kind of extra details like seams and paying attention to the thickness that your cloth has, as well as the final folds and creases, which again will be influenced by the shifts in your character's body as you put them into pose. And then also kind of going back in and putting those finishing touches on everything, the belts and buckles, laces, zippers, straps, and buttons, those types of things. So we're gonna, we not go over how to model specifically all that kind of stuff. It's all fairly simple, but just keep that kind of thing in mind. Those are the elements that make our character's costuming feel a little bit more finished up. So now I'm going to jump into ZBrush and talk about finishing up some cloth as sort of my general approach to doing cloth in ZBrush and costuming in ZBrush, and then just talk about the rest of the costuming elements. All right, so here we are in ZBrush, and let's go ahead and get started with finishing out a couple of cloth objects here. So the first thing that I'm doing is just I go around and I get very meticulous with the move brush as I try to figure out, the remaining proportional things and getting this shirt as close to the style and shape as the concept that I can get. So I'm just going to kind of do that now, just taking a look at how wide this collar is, some of the shapes that are being made there. Feels like that's doing a little bit wider like that, but everything also feels very straight. I'm going to try and get some more of that. A lot of straight lines in there, maybe a slight curvature to it. Clothing is one of those things you can sometimes have a little bit of leeway with as far as design, just in the individual angles of everything. Alright, so I do like to keep everything very, very low, but I'm wondering if maybe I might benefit from having a couple extra subdivision levels in here. So one thing I'm going to do is go to my Z Modeler brush and hover over an edge and then go to crease and then turn on edge loop complete. I want to just crease this edge to give myself the illusion of a holding edge there, just so that when I go into my smooth proxy like this, the dynamic subdivision, this edge is being held a lot better now. But I want to get a little bit more roundness into this collar. So staying in my Z Modeler brush, I'm going to start inserting some edges. So I'm going to insert an edge down here. Pull this edge up just to round everything out more. So that maybe we'll get a little bit more round on the inside as it turns towards her skin. and then a little bit sharper on the outside. That stiff collar. Anytime that I'm working this low, I will try to not use smooth unless I'm very aware of what it's going to do, because with fewer points, the smooth brush can just blast everything all over the place, and we don't want to ruin our model. So I pretty much just move every single vert around. This is just the way that I've gotten used to doing it. I think it gives me a lot of control over the straights and the curves and all the angles as they relate to the concept. So, alright, it's feeling a little bit better. Just want to resolve this. You see how this is getting kind of wavy in here? I like to just pull that stuff out and flatten it so that it is, at the very least, a more gentle curve. And then maybe this shirt is a little bit more asymmetrical in general, but I think that I'll handle that when I pose it. I can open up one of these collars a little bit more than the other one. And then I've noticed that there's kind of a large gap in between the bottom of this shirt and where her skin is. We start to see kind of a gap happening in here. So I'll just switch over to her body subtool, and for the purposes of just trying to make this look good now, just preemptively, I'm going to just fill in some of that area. So just because we've moved on from the body doesn't mean that it's totally done. We're always going to be going back and visiting little pieces here and there. So yeah, that feels alright. And when we add some thickness to this, it'll be fine. So now we've got the feel of this shirt working pretty well for us. This collar is really giving me some trouble. I just want it to kind of softly transition from being really rigid to kind of doing a reverse on the back side here. It's getting a little wavy. So maybe that's something that we can iron out a bit more when we get this into our thickness and into our pose a little bit. I feel like maybe I just need another subdivision, or edge loop I should say. I'm going to slide this one down a little bit. I'll just use this new subdivision to start pulling out around this collar so that I get more of a round shape back here. Ah, yes, this is very pushed in, I should say, too. So that's not helping me get the shape that I want. It's going to be a meticulous process. This can definitely take a long time. Seems like finishing anything, putting the final touches on anything is always more time consuming, or at least as time consuming as making the rest of it, even from scratch. Alright, that feels better. Just do a smooth mesh preview. Yeah, so now I'm getting a little bit more of a round shape on that, which I like. You know, looking at the concept, it's kind of puffed out from her neck a little bit, but I'm not going to worry too much about that because we're going to be angling that neck around and stuff in pose. So the last thing I'm going to do is, just as far as proportionally, let's just move this flap over a little bit more, the front part of her shirt. And I'm going to mask off so I can move the back side separately. And I'm going to call that good for blocking out the shirt. As far as, well, let's fix some, maybe just take that part out. Alright, so now I'm going to clean up these shoulders just a little bit. And I kind of want to define a seam for myself, like which of these spans is going to be the seam of my shoulder. I think it's going to be this one here. So I'm going to mark that, go back to ZModeler, and I'm just going to crease that edge. What if I crease that edge? See what that gives me. Maybe that's a little low for a seam. So instead, I'm going to do this edge. See what that gives me. That feels a little bit better. I kind of like how that seam is breaking sort of at the crest of her shoulder there too. So now all I have to do is just kind of move that seam more or less into place. It's getting a little wide in the back. It's like coming all clear across her back here. So I'll just push this over. I like to push it into the smooth proxy just to see how close I can get it. This is a relatively tight fitting clothing, so I want to make sure that it's contouring to her body since I spent so much time doing that. Pull this up a little bit. Alright, I think for our purposes that is totally fine. Maybe we're getting a little too tight here in the back. Pull that out, especially where the shirt is going to overlap the waistband a little bit. I might just go ahead and preemptively get a little bit of that wrinkling that happens, that bunching that'll happen around a tucked in shirt. Just a tiny bit. So I'm going to have to probably add another span. Just insert here. This is where the modeler is actually super handy, just being able to throw in a span there. I remember when we weren't able to do that, I had to take it to a different program to add any kind of geometry or change anything. It's like playing ZBrush in hard mode. Alright. So maybe not completely uniform all the way around the bottom. We're going to sculpt in a lot of this bulge anyway, so I don't need to go too crazy now, but I like to get, give myself at least a little bit of a head start before we move on to wrinkle detail. And I'm just going to push that purple back in space. Maybe if I hide some stuff, it'll be a little easier. Just to make sure that that overlap is feeling really secure and that the two front parts of the shirt aren't just kind of touching. They really do overlap. Alright, so that's the tedious block out of the shirt. And now we're ready to move on and start adding some extra details. I should note that I wouldn't normally add any kind of extra wrinkles or anything like that at this stage, unless I was just making a neutral character. So it's important to be aware of the needs of your character and like the pose that you're going to be putting them into. How extreme is that pose? Because if it's a crazy pose, we won't want to take our cloth all the way to a finished level, at least I wouldn't, before we start to pose everything. So a lot of times I'll wait and get something that's most of the way there, like this, and then, because all I need to do now is add wrinkles and thickness and seam detail and stuff like that. So, think about how much work you should do before posing versus how much you're going to do after. I didn't have symmetry on, so I'm just, going to do a quick smart resim there. Fix my sleeve. Alright, so now I'm just going to show how I like to go about detailing cloth. Just some really simple type of stuff like adding folds and wrinkles and making this not just feel like a generic piece of clothing that's in here. And it's important to note that I'm not going to do the final version of this shirt until next week when it's in pose, just because a lot of the wrinkles and stuff that you see happening in this concept are a result of the pose that she's in. So if your character's got some hero wrinkles, like maybe on the bust line here, or anything on the back, like up and down symmetrically in the back, then by all means go ahead and do that stuff this week. If it's something that you don't think is going to change much, then it's always a good idea to get as much as you can done before we jump into pose. But I want to show you now the process that I will use for doing that, just in case it's relevant to your particular character, and also because we won't be probably going over it as much next week. There will be lots of other stuff to talk about. So let's just go ahead and jump in. And what I'm going to do first off is give myself some thickness. So, let's say that this shirt has been sculpted into pose and it's ready to go. We just need to finish it up. And so just like we talked about lecture wise, we're going to start adding in all those details that make the shirt feel like it is believable, like it's not just kind of a piece that's in there to support and it's actually an integrated part of our character design. See, the process for cleaning up shapes never stops. All right, so let's go ahead and do that now. All right, I'm going to cut it off. All right, so we're going to go ahead and add some thickness to here. The way that I like to do this is if I turn off double-sided, now we can see the back side of those normals. What I'm going to do is extrude this entire surface, give the whole thing a uniform thickness all the way through by using edge loops. Down here in panel loops, you can see this button here. We're going to change a couple of these settings real quick, and that will give us our resultant surface. So the reason that I show this normals here is because what I want to do first is go into my display properties where I've got some options for normals here. Here I can toggle double on and off. So I turn that off. I'm going to flip those normals. So now we're seeing the backside of the normals facing us. And that's because when I extrude this surface, I want to extrude it in towards the body rather than out towards us. So just to show what happens now, if I hit panel loops, well, let me turn off some of these things. If I turn off polish and bevel and then hit panel loops, that gives me my thick surface. So now all I have to do is just adjust this thickness to whatever I need it to be. Let's try 0.03. Change my loops to 1 so that there's just one span made up of thickness. I usually do 1 or 2. 2 gives you that extra edge, that extra holding edge, which can be nice. Maybe we'll stick to 2 for now. And that thickness actually feels pretty good to me too. So if I divide this, you can see that it's got a thickness all the way through. One other thing to note is that it automatically separates your mesh into different pieces based on your poly grouping. So I'm going to undo that again, and then go in and click on Ignore Groups, and then run panel loops one more time. So now if I subdivide, all of these pieces are joined together. It's all one mesh now, and I still have my poly groups in here. So since I don't need to have the interior surfaces, I can just ignore them or sculpt on them and not worry about them, or delete them, whatever you choose to do, because we don't really, this shirt is so tight that we can't see up into her sleeves or anything like that. We're not going to be able to see into this gap in her chest or anything either. But one thing to note, let's say I go in now and I want to start sculpting on this surface. We start doing our sculpting or whatever. If I look on the inside of this mesh, it's totally jacking up the inside of this mesh. So what I want to do is maintain that inside surface if I keep it in there for now. And in order to do that, I'll just hide that inside surface and then invert my selection. So now I've got this inside surface very close to what I started with. I'm going to just turn this all into one poly group and then mask it. So now if I add some subdivisions, well, I guess you can't do that with a mask. So I'm going to clear my mask, add a couple subdivision levels in here, and then reselect that interior piece, mask it off. And then you can press Control H to hide that mask. Now you can do whatever kind of sculpting you want on this, and it's not going to affect your interior. Another thing you could do, I guess, is store a morph target, but this is a pretty effective way, I think. All right, so any major proportional changes to make, you're going to have to clear your mask because otherwise it won't take those pieces with it. You can also, add thickness later after you're done sculpting, but I find that this kind of skips a step if we do it this way. So let's go ahead and start doing some wrinkles. So I'm just going to show kind of a general way that I like to approach doing wrinkles. I like to stay as simple as possible because the wrinkles are not really the main attraction of your character, hopefully. Hopefully the costuming is not the most important part of your character's design. So we want to use wrinkles to emphasize the pose and the design, but not make them so overbearing and realistic that they're starting to get in the way. So I'm just using a standard brush for now. Let's just see what that kind of gives me. Some sort of wrinkle underneath her bust line here. maybe coming off of here a little bit. This is a pretty tight shirt. And then I'm going to try to keep, actually kind of like that more further back. All right, so let's just do like some bunching down here. I've kept the shorts in the scene here so that I can see where they overlap with the waist. But just in general, if you kind of just start simple and start to build out some shapes and then use the smooth brush to just knock back that detail right away. And this is only a couple subdivisions I've added. So we're at subdivision level 4. So pull back to see what's happening. You know, the frequency and thickness of those wrinkles are going to inform a lot about the material that your shirt or clothing item, whatever you're working on, is made out of, and also how realistic it's supposed to be, how heavy it is. I might sculpt sort of asymmetrically just for wrinkles. You see, I'm just staying as simple as possible for as long as possible. And I don't really get too much more complex than that. Just kind of build stuff up. This might even be getting too detailed, too wrinkly, but it's a demo, so kind of go crazy. And then just making sure that these aren't all exactly the same thickness, so that it doesn't just, not everything's just the same standard brush radius or whatever brush you were using. And then I like to go in and do a couple sharper edges, get some breaks going on in those wrinkles. And then we quickly arrive at a time where it's time to subdivide. So the way that we built this shirt, we kept these quads very even, which is nice because everything subdivides really evenly. And then I think in order to subdivide this up again, I'll have to clear my mask, subdivide once, get myself another resolution, step down, hide, and mask that interior again. Go back up to the top and finish out some wrinkles. So it's helpful to look at existing wrinkling patterns and, you know, some reference. This is feeling a little bit too wrinkly for my taste. Kind of have to decide on a per character basis. Some characters will benefit. It'll fit the style to have a lot of crazy wrinkles going all over the place. Some characters it'll be a detriment. So just kind of try to have fun with it, you know, and I always try to keep in mind this pattern, the sort of diamond pattern as I'm sculpting wrinkles. You can see I'm doing that a little bit, just having some X's and Z's and crisscrosses. It's kind of like a good approximation of what actual wrinkles would be doing. And then if you can, like let's say there's going to be a button here, it might be kind of cool to get a little bit of interaction between these sides. So if I go now over to the other side, I'm just going to mask off something like that, give myself a temporary poly group. So we'll have that button crease coming in over here too. And that's really overdoing it, but now one of the next things that I'll do is add those buttons. So if I've built these buttons in a separate program, and now all I've got to do is just place them in, something like that. Probably could have spent a little bit more time on that, but hopefully you get the idea. Getting those things to feel a little bit integrated across seams and across forms is handy. So I'm gonna clear my mask there. That's, I mean, generally my approach to doing wrinkles. Obviously, if you've got big baggy clothes, the only thing that's really going to be different is that your wrinkles are going to be larger and they're going to feel a little bit more weight towards the bottom. You know, heavier clothing or something with a lot more material is always going to bunch up and bag towards the bottom. So the shirt's fairly tight, all these wrinkles just kind of go across and they don't really change your silhouette that much. But you know, if this was like very loose fitting or untucked or something, it might come out and do something like that on the side. You know, you have to think about it like, what if you filled a sack full of sand and that weight is going to make it do this kind of thing as it's sitting on the ground, right? So it's going to bulge out as it gets down, because that's the force of gravity pulling everything down. So we want to make sure that we get some of that going too. But that's my general approach to doing cloth folds and wrinkling. It's just I sculpt things up very slowly. I take my time, and we'll revisit this next week when I do my final wrinkling. And the next thing that I would do is, like I already kind of mentioned, we've got some buttons and stuff that we can put into place. So just really quickly place those. The buttons don't really show up in the concept, so I'm not sure if I'll keep them. Maybe there's something I can do to diminish how important they look right now, because they're very conspicuous. But just having them in there adds a little bit of nice detail, I think. Something like that. Then you can just individually adjust each one of these so that it feels like it's nicely snugged up in there. Yeah, that feels alright. Just kind of move this stuff around. I might really try to get that to feel like it's sharp, like there's a nice break there. And then the last thing to do would be to go in and add seams or anything like that you want to put in. I've already creased this edge, which is giving us a little bit of a seam there. But, it could be nice also to just kind of go and overemphasize that a little bit with like a mech brush or something, just sculpting that seam in so that when the light hits it, we really get a sense that there's two pieces lined up against each other there. So we just define that crease and then build it up a little bit on both sides. In the final version of this shirt, I'm thinking about maybe doing like a stitch brush or something to put some stitches in. But you could go in with like the damn standard brush and really put the power up on that. Some lazy mouse and just crank that seam right in there. Since it's so high res, we can always clean it up relatively easily too. There's a lot of ways to do seams on clothing, so whatever method works best for you is great. And since we built this cloth, we built this shirt the way that it normally would be built. There's a span there that supports a seam. There's a span up here that we could put a seam into, or at least we've got topology running along that, so we can just kind of put a seam in anywhere up here. Right, so once I've sculpted in something, I can just go over it maybe with a pinch brush to just clean it up, get nice forms going. So you can spend a little bit more time on these than I did. Get some nice looking seams, but that is the kind of detail that I wouldn't do until I'm totally done with everything else. One last area that I like to just get a sculpt in is these armpit areas here. It's always going to be these sort of radial folds coming out. It feels like that. So getting that area feeling nice is going to be very beneficial. And then just clean up the shape with the move brush. Right on. So that's the way that I approach doing folds and stuff. This is probably a little bit more complex than I would do for the final character, but not by much. And, I would spend a little bit more time and love on sculpting up these folds. But we'll get to that next week. I just wanted to show it this week in case anyone's concepts have got some hero folds that you want to go ahead and get out of the way. Or if you wanted to get some seam or fold and wrinkle practice in, you could go ahead and get started on that. And I just want to talk about these shorts real quick. I'll just show you how I went ahead and broke those down. So those are all ready to go as well. They've added thickness. They're probably a little bit further along than where these pants are. But I've added thickness to all the pieces. I've got separate rings for where they're folded up. Because why make it complicated if I don't have to? I'm going to show the whole body so we can see her legs. And then I've added in stuff like these buttons, and I've got these flaps on the side. Where are those? Yep. So the flaps that fold up there, and I just built that, according to this concept first, and then modified a few things here and there to make it work a little bit better in 3D. So that's where we're at with the clothing for this week. And so if you can get your clothing blocked out to about this level, where pieces have thickness where they need it, but we're just not quite to the point where we're starting to add extra details like wrinkles and seams, then you should be good to go for posing. All right. One last note about costuming and clothing before we move on to the pose is the boots, the footwear. So last week I just modeled up some very basic footwear, some boots here. The only thing that I really cared about for this model, clearly, is the edge loops and just giving myself a support structure to build a boot on top of. You can see that this is far from being on model for the boots in the character's costuming here. But let me just stick this up here in the corner. This is what I turned that into. So this is just following the exact same process that I used for clothing, just lining stuff up with the move brush, just pushing stuff around in large proportions, and then adding spans and stuff where I need them, and not really getting too much more complex than that. This has no subdivisions on it, so with one subdivide, I get something that's very, very close to the concept. Clearly there's some stuff that I can do to this still, but it's definitely far enough along that I can pose it and add any kind of extra detail and stuff that I want in pose. So that is just my approach to doing footwear, is just very simple, and I take my time moving stuff around so that it fits the concept, and the breaks and everything are feeling like they belong in the right place. And then I just, for these bands and extra pieces of footwear, I'll just generate those straight off of the boot. And, so that just came from this orange poly group here. I just generated those bands straight off of there and sculpted them into place. And that's it. So this is just a move brush and duplicating and extracting faces and pushing stuff around, adding spans where I need them. And that's it. So that's footwear. All right, now we're going to begin posing, which is a literal balancing act in some respects. And this is a very important part of our character sculpting process. And this is something that can really make or break this character. So we want to spend some careful attention on the way that we go about posing, and keep a few simple things in mind as we work slowly and purposefully, and it won't be too bad. And I think that we'll get through this. So I just want to talk about a couple things real quick. There's this great character spreadsheet again. And I want to just say, we talked a little bit earlier in the class about finding a line of action. So hopefully just looking at some of these drawings, you can find that action line just by looking at them. Just a through line through the pose that sort of indicates a directionality and the acting that's happening. So another thing that we should just touch on briefly is finding balance and distribution of weight. So I've drawn a couple of lines here just through what is sort of the center of gravity of this guy in all of these different poses. And you can see that on either side of this red line, the weight is distributed in an even way. So this red line is going to go straight down through the center of balance of your character, where all of that weight is centered when they're standing or jumping or crouching, whatever they're doing. So, on Flynn here, he's for every extreme, like in the upper left corner there where he's got his foot way back, for every, he's got that foot telescoped way back behind him, but the rest of his body is lunging forward, and he's got his weight over that foot that's down on the ground. It's very easy to see. So, it's something that can kind of go unnoticed, but it's something that we need to be very aware of as we are sculpting our character. And then another thing that's kind of handy is just trying to figure out the ground plane of your character. So this can be handy for sort of figuring out a little bit of perspective on your character, but also just making sure that they look grounded from your camera angle. And the way that I always do that, whether I'm drawing or sculpting, is just imagine a circle drawn on the ground. It should go through both of your character's feet, and then of course our center of balance should be in that circle, within that circle. If you were to plumb line down from that character's center of gravity, we'd find that kind of evenly, between the 2 feet. So here's a couple more examples here. I've drawn an action line through this dancer over here, and then her center of balance. You can see that you will almost always, if you've got 1 foot planted, that center of balance line is always going to come right up through the middle of that foot. Or if like all of your weight is on 1 foot, it'll kind of come up through that 1 foot. Just like on this guy standing here, we've got that center of gravity kind of shifted over to the side of his body because most of his weight is on that back foot. There's a little bit on the forward foot, the one that's up on the stone there, so that shifts that balance line back a little bit. And then this other guy standing here on the right, he's got, a fairly even stance, so his center of gravity is right there in the middle. We just draw that line right up through the middle of his body. And you'll notice that even though he's standing fairly symmetrically, he's got a fairly even distribution of weight through his body is not symmetrical at all. He's got one hip that's, pushed up a little bit. He's cocked his head to the side a little bit. There's a flow to this character even though he's standing relatively still. So let's try to find these lines on our own character designs. So the first thing that I'm going to do is ground my character. If I draw this circle through the base of her feet, both feet connect halfway on that circle, which means that her center of balance or center of gravity is going to fall within that circle. And it's clear to see that she's got most of her weight on that far back left leg, and that's kind of supporting most of her weight as she's kicking that hip up a little bit, and that other foot is sort of outstretched to help support and balance her. So the center of mass is shifted slightly from the middle ring. And now we're going to jump into ZBrush and start seeing what this means for our characters in 3D. So here we go. All right, now it's time to apply everything that we've been talking about to our character's pose. And we're going to actually get in and start posing this character out this week and try and get most of the way there so that next week we can really focus on tuning up the little details and finishing up every little piece of this. And so we're going to go ahead and get started. And in order to pose this character, I'm going to use ZBrush's Transpose Master. It's a plugin that comes with ZBrush. If you haven't used it before, we'll go over some basics there. But it's going to be, there's a lot of little things that will end up changing, I'm sure. There's some proportional stuff. There's some things that will become apparent as we start to pose this character that we'll need to work on. And so expect like little pieces of the model will need to be resculpted, and that's okay. That's just part of making a character. So we're going to go ahead and get started now, posing up our model. So the first thing that I'm going to do is throw the whole character into Transpose Master. So if you go to your Z plugins, Transpose Master, T-Pose Mesh, and T-Pose Sub T is what we are looking at. And I have these buttons here in my UI. So I'm going to hit Transpose Mesh. It's going to cycle through all of my visible subtools and give us this Transpose Mesh. So the first thing that I always do whenever using Transpose Master, so before you get in and do anything, before you get in and start doing any kind of sculpting at all on this character, is immediately go back to subtools. And that's because if you have anything that's hidden or partially hidden or broken in some way, it'll show up just like this. So you see how it said I had a vertex mismatch on that shirt. That's because if I go back to the shirt now and show, the back of it was hidden, like there was a piece of it out like this. So you want to make sure that you don't get an error when you head back to your subtools. So now with that cleared up, I should be good to go. I'll just run it one more time. There's nothing worse than posing out your character, spending a lot of time doing some pose work, only to have several of your subtools not make it back. with all that pose information on it. So it's something that you can fix, but it's a pain. So if we can avoid it, we will. All right, so now we're ready. Right, so posing out this character is going to be, anytime I pose a character, I like to approach it from just the most simple and straightforward way that I can do it, as in all things. So, go slow, take your time, and really put some effort into just analyzing your model as you go. Let's just get this axe more or less in place here. She doesn't have a lot of pieces to her, which is good. Axe is clearly too large in concept. Just scale it up a little bit for now. Anyway, we don't need to get too crazy with that just yet. Just get something in there. One good idea whenever you're posing is to save a default view. And this is something that might change, but like if this is the angle that I want to kind of check against my concept, I'll just get it placed. And then over here in document, if you go under ZAppLink properties, you've got a bunch of different buttons in here. We'll just click any of these. How about custom one? That's going to save out a view. It's going to kind of bookmark that now, so I can move this anywhere in the canvas. I can keep working. And then if I want to check where I'm at, I'll just go back to document and click custom one there, and it'll snap right back to where I was. And then you can go into your document palette here, and you can save out your views file. So that is something that might be useful to you. And we'll go ahead and get started here. So I like to start with the biggest shapes first. And so what I'm going to do is, first of all, acknowledge that I might lose some details in these buttons. I might do something that causes those buttons to get messed up or no longer round. So that's okay. They're relatively minor. I'm not going to worry about it too much. But let's start by doing some contrapposto kind of tilt. Change my mask to the lasso there. We'll just get this whole upper body. And I like to section everything off as clearly as possible. Yeah, just as kind of one big piece. Then I blur my mask a little bit and turn off symmetry. By default, symmetry is off in Transpose Master. And let's just rotate this upper body a little bit now. So actually it's going to be more like this. So if we take a look over here at the concept, the line of her hips are going like this, so that her left hip is kind of up higher. And then, so we know that we're going to automatically have a bias in the shoulder line to be the opposite of that. So we'll get something that does this. And that's just a natural thing that happens. Whenever we are tilting our hips and our shoulders at the same time, they tend to play off of each other like that. So maybe not quite as tilted as that. Just go a little bit on the upper body, translate that over just a tiny bit. Now let's get the lower body so we can just flip our, oh, I'm doing it on the wrong side already. So I'm just going to rotate this down a little bit this way so that the shoulder with the axe is higher up in the air. It's barely perceptible in the concept, but we know that it's going to be going on. So I'm going to now tilt the lower body up quite a bit, maybe translate that over some, and then just look at what's going on in these different views here. I also feel like her upper body is probably twisted a little bit sideways. So I'm just going to place my transpose line in the center of the mass as much as I can. And now I'm lining up like the lower body, like the pants, to be about the same angle as they are in the concept art. And I'll just twist that upper body a little bit so that she's a little bit more flat to the front. It's feeling good. Rotate around, see what's going on. So I want to get the feeling of this strong arc that's going through her body, this sort of thing. There's this S shape that's going all the way through her. So I want to make sure that that is coming across in my pose. Broad strokes first, always. So now let's get some of these. Let's get the pants working for us. So now is the time where we might want to go and you can actually break up stuff into more polygroups in Transpose Master. Pretty handy. So I'll do that. So now it just becomes a weird process of hiding, showing, masking, all this different stuff. If you switch your brush to, or your selection to rectangle, it's a lot easier to grab stuff to mask it. Probably shouldn't care about those buttons at all, but it might be handy to not have to resculpt those if I don't have to. Okay, I'll probably blur that mask a little bit. Alright, so now I've got just the leg isolated, and I've brought as much of the subtool information with it as I can. And you know, just because I hate when something gets screwed up, I'll just do something like this and pull my unmasked object really far away just to see if anything else goes flying off the body. Make sure I didn't miss anything. So now it's time to start pushing this leg outwards, hinging from kind of the hip crotch area. And I think that this leg's going to go forward a little bit too. Alright, maybe let's try that for now. And let's get this leg over here going. So this is our support leg, and this is going to be the one where most of our weight is on, the leg that supports a lot of this round shape in the back here is going to happen. So we're already getting that a little bit, which is a good sign. I just want to make sure that I kind of feel like this upper body could shift over a little bit. Just grab things like the glove and the boot. I'm going to treat as one just whole unbending object for now, and then I should probably fix that foot too. So ideally, probably what I would have done is go in and delete some geometry where that foot is, because it's just going to get in the way. So here's what I'm going to do instead. Since it's in there, I will unmask all of this stuff so that it'll come with the boot, at least. If you turn off perspective, you can use your document guides, document boundaries to sort of figure out a flat ground plane for your feet and stuff. Take that out like that. I think that that leg would probably be rotated out a little bit too, so I'm just going to use transpose to do that. Drawing one transpose line and then control shift clicking to add another transpose line in there. I'll blur that mask. Press that white circle to snap the transpose line to the center of your selected mass. Adjust accordingly. Now I can rotate that leg out a little bit. Looks like the angle's a little bit off on that. Yep, that's what I want. Like that. And then just remember to check what you're doing in perspective again every once in a while. And it never hurts. I wouldn't go too crazy with cleanup, but it doesn't hurt to go in and fix a few little things here and there before you get going too far. So I'm just pulling these shorts around a bit so that they don't IP quite as much, especially the lower parts here. Alright, so we're getting some weird crashing and stuff that's happening up here. It's not really a big deal. We'll just have to kind of resculpt that. The main thing that I want to do is just make sure that this pose is coming together. So I think maybe let's just try. I want to try pulling this leg out some. A couple things happening here where the the feet are not landing on the exact same plane, which is fine. Turn out that leg just a little bit. Turn off perspective so I can gauge where this foot is going. So I think the issue might be that my hips aren't swinging up high enough. Let's try to correct that. And I'm going to start just kind of working fast and dirty, trying to get into the right proportions and stuff here. If you spend too much time tweaking stuff and fixing things, you're going to be doing this forever. So just accept that you'll have to fix some stuff after this pose is done. Kind of get a little bit of an invert on that leg. Maybe just pull this down some. Not really sure what's going on. I think I lost my pants. My shorts were so nice there, but they seem to be kind of broken now. It happens. So now if I line this up with document bounds, it's feeling a little bit better. Just do something like that for now. Clearly there's a lot of cleanup work that's going to need to happen there. No one's butt should sag like that, but that's all kind of secondary. The point is, or the main thing that I'm looking for here is if I draw a plumb line down from her clavicle, does that land more or less in the center of her gravity? Right now I think it does. I think it's working. So I might turn this boot out just a little bit, see if that's going. And like I said, make sure you're working in perspective, or at least checking yourself in perspective frequently. So I think that that foot is coming out a little too far. Push that back. I think her whole body might be angled just a little bit more forward. And then I'm going to grab her whole upper body here and angle it backwards so I can get a little bit more of that upward, thrust that I feel like is really in this concept. This line of action right here on the front of her body, pretty important. Let's make sure that we got that. Okay, it's feeling better. There's a lot left to do. It's okay to get to a certain point and realize that maybe you've mangled your model beyond repair, and it's okay to restart. If you haven't done a lot of this before, it's very easy to quickly screw up your model. I think it happens to everybody. Transpose master is very unforgiving because you're just basically moving everything around. It's like if this whole thing was just one object, that's what we'd be doing. The benefit is that we can get all of our subdivision levels back. So let's just get, I think I'm going to get all the rest of the body pieces as close into pose as I can. Let's check with our view here, see where we're at. I think our view has changed a little bit. Could just be this lower body. Just check on those changes. So from this angle, I'm feeling like there's something awkward about that pose. There's not enough distance between these feet. And I think it might be that this back leg doesn't feel like it's going far enough back. So you see how from this angle and from this angle, it just feels too straight up and down and kind of awkward. Let's try just pulling that back a little bit. Taking this stuff here. Pushing it up some. Also feeling like maybe these legs are not quite as thick as they need to be. It's always amazing to me how much proportional stuff you will figure out when you start to pose things. Alright, so what does that give us? It's better. I'm looking at the feet. I think that it's better. This might be cranked back a little bit too far, or possibly rotated too much. It's a balancing act, definitely trying to get all this stuff working in harmony. Turn on double-sided so I can see that collar. And let's start to get those arms moved back a little bit. So swing this straight back a little bit. Get a little bit more of the shoulder in there. Let's pivot that directly from the clavicle. This arm is swung back quite a bit. It's a lot higher up. And let's bend it now too. So frequently bending the arms, we're going to get a lot of crashing happening. We can kind of control it a little bit at least. Don't want to lose too much length on that arm. Just grab this glove. Just do like a rough rotate into place. Actually, since that glove is a separate object, it's going to be nice to be able to just put that where I want it to go, more or less, and then put that arm into pose on top of it. Here we can see just how quickly limbs and stuff can start getting mangled. It'll be interesting to see how this resolves when we bring it back into subtool land. Alright, let's say that that's okay for now. Let's keep going with some of these other body parts. What happened to you, Shorts? Alright, so she lost a lot of butt mass, I think, and a lot of other stuff too. That's alright. Let's get the arm here. So we might as well just go ahead and bend this. Whoops, something happened to that hand. And then once again, I can just, since I've got these gloves, which are basically going to be my hands, on a separate object here, put those where I want them, and then I can move everything else into place around it, aka this arm. And all I really want to do is just kind of connect the wrists, connect those wrists up a little bit. Something like that. Alright, so we're getting closer. Obviously, we're still pretty far off. There's a lot of stuff that needs some adjustment, but this is the process. Just going through and doing a little piece here and there, stepping back to take a look at the whole thing every once in a while. We're just going to get the head more or less in a pose. So once I get something kind of close, can play around with getting the, filling in the areas in between with the move brush. And so on and so forth. If it's helpful, you can always get up and try to make this pose yourself. Might give you some insight into something that's off or something that needs a little bit of a tweak. If you're working off of a piece of concept art where the character is in a very specific pose already, then try to get that as much as possible, of course. But if you can find little ways to improve on what's happening with your character's pose here and there, then you should definitely try to do it. if you can plus up your model in any way in 3D, we want to do that. So checking everything from different angles just to make sure that you know, we're still getting a good curvature to things, that nothing is looking too symmetrical. If you look at your character from the top down, this is always a good test. Just make sure that there's no major lines that are going in the same direction. So we've got the line of this axe as a visual element pointing in one way. We've got the line of these shoulders as another visual element pointing a different way, and it's a little bit hard to see, but our hips are going this way, so that nothing is totally in line from top to bottom. Even if your character is standing fairly symmetrical in your pose, anything that you can do to reduce those parallels is going to help a lot. Wondering if these legs are a little bit on the thin side. Just kind of going around and doing some bulking. Pull these socks back out. It's getting there. It's starting to feel decent. There, we've got some distance to travel still. And then begins, I should say. And then begins the obsessive edge loop fixing that I will do, where I'll just go around and clean everything. Alright, turn off perspective every once in a while just to check your orthographics. So this angle is feeling better than it was, but I'm wondering, this angle is probably the weakest orthographically. It's not terrible, but there's some stuff that we can try to tweak. Namely, I'm feeling like she's a little bit too up and down right here, so I would want to kick this back leg back further or this front leg forward further. I'm not really sure which. It could be doing something like this. Move that leg like this, and then move the whole thing forward a bit. Until that angle starts to feel better to me. Yeah, it's feeling better already. Slide this over so that it's a little bit more underneath her. We've got a foot mismatch again. Think that maybe I just shortened that leg a little bit too much. If you need to take a break while you're sculpting in pose, which we should probably just think about doing real quick, a good thing to do, you can save this file out, but you can also save out this, while you're working in pose, it's a good idea to save out your pose file instead of your Z tool. So what I'll do is go and hit T-pose mesh again, and then you'll get this little option where you can save a transpose file. So I'll just say pose 001, and then now what I can do is I'll go back to subtools. Let's just check to see how mutilated this is. It's gonna move everything around a lot. Think for a second. Alright, so here's what we've got. We can check that against the concept, see where some stuff is off. A lot of stuff is crashing, but we're getting there, little by little. And so overall, I think it's a success. But now I would save this file out. So I would save this as, whatever. This is going to be Jane pose mid 01. So save often. And then now anytime I load this file up, I can just go straight back into transpose mesh, or since all of the topology and stuff in here is the same as, so if I load up the start of this right here, so this is right before we got into transpose, I can just go in and press this T-pose to sub T, and then load a transpose file from disk, choose that one that we saved out, and it's going to go through and apply all of those transpose changes that we did. So it's effectively saving out your pose as you go. The issue, of course, with saving your file while you're in transpose master mode is that you won't get all your subtools back, and you won't get all of your color or anything like that that you've already applied. So That's it. We're on our way with this pose. We just kind of need to keep doing what we're doing, circling around and fixing stuff here and there as we go, and we'll get there. Got some balance things we need to work out, but it's good to hop back and forth, maybe see some color on there every once in a while. It's really going to help inform you as you go forward. All right, so just keep at it, and I'm going to do that now. All right, I'm going to go back into transpose now, and I'm just going to keep rotating around this model, adjusting things as I see, and just keep going with it. So trying to keep in mind the line of action and the weight distribution, and we'll just keep going from there. Adjusting proportions and things as I go along. At a certain point, it might be handy to set your sort of hero angle for this character. So for me, I think that that's going to be this angle. And what I'm going to do is just go and rotate this whole thing so that it's kind of the main angle from the drawing here. Maybe something like that. And I'm just going to start pushing on some proportion stuff. Looks like there's some things that are a little bit off or could use some work. So there's no real right or wrong way to do this part. The posing is all going to be just kind of your own methodology for it. You can see that I have a tendency to jump in and just kind of start distorting the mesh, and that will require some extra cleanup later, but that's just kind of the way I work. I don't like to get hung up on trying to fix every little piece before as I'm going along, because then I'll just stay in this limbo state of constantly noodling all these little pieces as opposed to going through and actually finishing my dang character. So whatever you can do to minimize the noodling, that's going to be, at least for me, I think that that's the way to go. Probably get more in-depth on hands and stuff next week. So now anytime I snap back to my home position here, to my orthographic view from the front, I'll always get the right angle. So this is, in my opinion, better than saving out views. His hands are feeling a little small all of a sudden. I'm going to scale them both up at once. I'm still not really decided on that hand. Let's go with the closest thing to the pose for now. I'll use transpose master typically to get as far as I can on the whole model all at once, and then go back once you're back in subtools. You can do all your fixing on your individual subtools a little easier than you could here, where it just becomes a nightmare of deselecting things and masking stuff off, and we don't want to spend our whole time doing that. But I'll get as much of that done here as I can. From this angle, I'm getting kind of an awkward. See that there's some weight distribution that isn't quite working. Let's try just pushing this whole leg out to the side a little bit, see what that does for me. Let's see how much other stuff I've got selected. Alright, nothing. Get this to work from this angle. Sometimes it's a good idea also to take your model back into another package, like a rendering package, and just see what you're getting. Because ZBrush doesn't actually have a 3D camera like Maya does. So what you see here might look good in ZBrush or bad in ZBrush, and what's happening in the rendering package might be totally different. So something to think about. Whatever your final product, whatever this is going to be viewed in, it'd be handy to get an actual camera perspective. Alright, it's feeling like we're kind of in the ballpark. There's definitely some stuff that I still want to work out, but it's feeling a much closer than it was, so that's good. So one of those things, the earlier week where I said that everything looks terrible until it doesn't, that is super true for posing. So, we'll just gotta tell ourselves that it's all gonna come together in the end, and it'll be worth whatever horrible atrocities we're doing to our models right now. You shouldn't lose too much work. It should be fine. We're kind of just mangling everything into shape. If it helps to do like a quick proxy pass or something, sometimes I've used that in the past to pose out a model just to check to make sure that it's doing everything I want it to. This is feeling all right for a block out, for a start to this. Let's bring it back over. I'm going to save this real quick. Transpose, save transpose mesh. I'm just going to save this out as my second pose file here. All right, so we're mangled up. We're beaten up a little bit on this sculpt, but as I snap around to, let me just quickly convert this back over to color. All right, so as I rotate this model around, what I'm seeing is, there's a lot of little things that need cleanup, but the main structure is in here. We've got pretty good balance on this model. If I look at it from underneath, everything is going like, here's the angle of my hips, and then I've got the angle of my shoulders is going something like that, and then my eye line is more rotated too. So there's an overall twist to the body, which makes it feel a little bit more interesting. And she doesn't feel super off balance from any one view. There's little things I can tweak overall, but I think that this is feeling pretty good for this week. Just for our first initial block out of this character, it's feeling good to me. So yeah, we're gonna stop there for now, and then we can get all of our tweaking done and finish everything up, I think, a little easier next week. All right, so this is where we landed on this. for now, I'm going to keep sculpting on this a little bit in between now and next week just to clean some things up, and we'll pick up from here. All right, so this brings us to the homework this week, things that I want you to keep in mind. So we're going to final our clothing as much as we can before posing. So you'll have to figure out, based on your individual designs, how much work needs to go into the clothing before you pose and how much should be done afterwards. Because we're going to kind of mangle up our model a little bit, especially if you have a really extreme pose. If your pose is fairly symmetrical and fairly simple, like maybe your character just has their legs spread apart a little bit, they're standing, in a relatively simple pose, you could probably go a little bit further with the clothing. But we are going to finalize everything next week with all the little bells and whistles and details and stuff like that. But if you can, after finish posing, or I should say, if you can, after you finish posing, get some extra details in there like buttons and zippers, straps and seams. The farther you can get with that kind of thing, the better. I always avoid adding any thickness in cloth until it's in pose, but before sculpting up wrinkles and things like that. So finally, I want you guys to pose your model as far as you can take it. If you can get 80 to 90% there, you should be in good shape for next week. And we've only got 1 week left, so we're going to kind of have to tie everything together here at the end, and it's going to take a lot of time. If you haven't done very much transposing before or posing a character at all, then plan on screwing up every once in a while and needing to restart or go back to a previous save. So save often and be smart about the way that you approach posing, and you should be in good shape. So that's it for this week. I hope that you guys got a lot of good info and put in some time and really make these characters shine, because like I said, the pose is what is going to sort of make or break this character. This is what's going to help sell this if you were in like a art director type of environment, and you've got to get this character approved to go into animation or to go into production in some way. So, this is what's going to sell our design. All right, so keep that in mind and have fun posing this week.